Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I've gotten a few comments and questions asking me to do a video talking about the wear and tear of Chanel lambskin, and both of the two items that I have from Chanel in their lambskin leather I've had for approximately 5 years now. So I think that is a good amount of time to really be able to give you guys an overview of what you might be able to expect from their lambskin leather. So I have this one card holder which I've had for I believe over 5 years now. I think I bought it sometime in 2015. And then I have my classic flap, which is also in lambskin. This I think I've had for approximately 4.5 years, maybe a little bit more, but I don't think it's quite at the 5-year mark, but it's close enough that I don't think the wear and tear will change drastically between now and when I've had it for 5 years. So yes, this will be a 5-year wear and tear of Chanel lambskin. I hope this video is helpful for you guys, and let's get into it. So I'm going to talk about this card holder first because I've had this for a little bit longer, and I also use this a lot more often than I do my classic flap, because basically whenever I'm using a smaller size bag where my full-size wallet doesn't fit into it, I would use this card holder with that bag. And in the past 5 or so years, I would say that I probably use it at least once per week, especially in the past 1 or 2 years when I've been really gravitating towards using mini bags. I would say that I even use this at least 2 times per week. So in the past 5 years, I would say at least this has been used like 250 times, which, considering I've used this for that many times, I would say the wear and tear on this is so great. And I don't do anything particularly special when I'm storing this SLG. I just lay it down flat. Sometimes I would lay it on its back, and sometimes I'll have it so that the front is facing down, just so the wear and tear on the quilt is a little bit more even, and it's not like one side is completely flattened out and the other side is still really puffy. And I think the great thing about getting a quilted item in lambskin leather is because lambskin does tend to have a little bit of a glossy sheen to it. Even when the quilts do flatten out a little bit over time, because of that sheen, it almost looks a little bit more three-dimensional than it actually is. And I know that a lot of people are concerned about getting an SLG in lambskin because since this is an item that just lives in your bag, there is a potential for it to scrape up against something else in your bag and the leather will get scratched really easily. But honestly, in the 5 years that I've owned this, I don't actually recall ever getting a scratch on this, and if I did, it just disappeared without me even noticing, which I think is highly unlikely. So let's go with there hasn't been any scratches on the quilting in the 5 years that I've owned it. And the only wear and tear that I see on this card holder, I don't think is unique to the lambskin material. I think if I had gotten the same exact card holder in caviar, I would still see the same wear and tear. So I think the biggest wear and tear that I see is on these bottom 2 corners, where it has gotten a little bit black in those corners, just because this card holder sits straight up like this in my bag, so it's probably rubbing against the bottom of my bag. And one of the corners, I think a little bit of the top blue color has kind of rubbed off or peeled off, so it looks a little bit like yellow underneath. And the other thing is where the card presses up against the leather, there is basically like a line across the card holder that, you know, just shows that you've been using the card holder. It's not a really big deal, but the interesting thing is I've noticed that this card slot on the back right here, this top one, that's probably the one where it has the biggest line. And I suspect it's because the credit card that I usually place in this spot does have sharper corners, or sharper edges actually, so it's left a little bit more of a mark here, but once again, it's kind of expected. And as for my classic flap, like I mentioned, I've had this bag for approximately 4.5 years, and aside from the past half a year or so, which, as you can imagine, I haven't been using such a dressy bag whatsoever, I think I can only recall 2 specific times that I've used this bag in the past half a year. But for the other 4 years that I've owned it, I would say that I've used it decently consistently, especially for such a fancy bag. I would say that I probably use it maybe once or twice per month. So in the past 4.5 years, maybe I've used it a grand total of between 50 to 70 times. This is the type of bag that I only really use when I'm either in my own car or I'm taking a taxi or something. It's not something that I would be carrying on public transportation of any sort. And for this bag, when I used to live in my studio apartment in Manhattan, where the closet space was just pretty non-existent, it wasn't something where I was displaying my bags or anything. So when I lived there, I actually did the whole thing where I had this in its dust bag and I had the felt protecting every single flap and every individual layer, and then I had this chain in that little pocket in the dust bag, and everything was kind of not really sitting against any other part of the bag. Since I moved to a bigger apartment with more space and I had dedicated space to store my handbags, I decided to just do away with all of the dust bags and pieces of felt and everything, because I really wanted to be able to see my bag for what it looks like. So yeah, I changed up how I store my bag. So I really only have it like this with tissue paper inside the bag, and then I have the chain at the back over here, because if it were to leave any marks, I'd rather it leave marks on the back of the bag rather than the front. So yes, that's how I store it, and honestly I haven't noticed any difference between just storing it like this versus having it in the dust bag and felt and all that jazz. And I also want to mention that I'm not really the type of person that ever puts any of my bags on the floor, but especially for this bag, I wouldn't dare to put it on the floor. So for the bottom, even though there's no metal feet on it or anything, the wear and tear has actually been great. There's a few marks here and there, but nothing super major, no big scratches or anything. And on the bottom, there's only this one corner that has a little bit of the leather that peeled off. And if you look at the bag just like this, even though the quilting has kind of flattened out a little bit over time, it really isn't apparent whatsoever, because like I mentioned, the sheen on the lambskin leather is just so amazing that it really adds a bit of dimension and depth to the quilting. And honestly, before I sat down to jot down my notes for this video, I didn't even notice that the quilts were a little bit flatter than they used to be. It was only when I turned it at an angle and I looked that I kind of realized that, oh yeah, it got a little bit flatter. And in comparison, the back is definitely a little bit flatter than the front is, which kind of makes sense because you're wearing this side against your body, and especially if you're carrying this over your shoulder, then yes, this is kind of squished underneath your arm. So I'm not surprised that this side has gotten a little bit flatter, and honestly, it's kind of inevitable, so it doesn't really bother me. Now, I would say that the biggest wear and tear on the outside of the bag is there is this one line that is not really a crease. It's more that the leather around this one area here is a little bit more wrinkled, and it's right where these two stitches are for the two flaps. And that's because when you open the bag, this whole top area of the flap does tend to get a little bit wrinkled when you open it, but most of it actually doesn't stay wrinkled when you close the bag, except for that one line there. And I would say that I am generally a very careful person, but I am also a very clumsy person. So I have banged this bag against door frames and car doors and that type of thing. There are a few times that I can think of where I have scratched the leather, but what I do is I just use my finger and I just like rub at it really gently, and that really just easily gets off those scratches. Especially if you do it right after noticing that something might have happened, then it comes off really easily. So yes, that's what the outside of the bag looks like in terms of wear and tear. The majority of the wear and tear actually is on the inside of the bag, which I think is a good thing, or not a good thing, but luckily it's on the inside and not the outside, because you don't really see it at all. So I think the majority of the wear and tear is on this inner flap right here, because there's just a lot of things between this chain and the zipper that are pressing up against the leather here. And because the leather over here is a flat, smooth leather instead of the quilted leather on the outside, any type of mark is just much more apparent on here. So where the zipper and the zipper pull is sitting up against the leather, you can see that there is a very apparent mark. And then over here where the chains come through the grommets, you can see that there is also some indents on the leather here. Even when I had those pieces of felt covering these areas, I noticed that you could still see the imprints, so I wouldn't necessarily say that putting the felt on there really gets rid of that possibility whatsoever, which is why I decided to just do away with all those felt pieces. And on the inside over here, I would say that the majority of the wear and tear is on this smaller section in the front over here, because I usually put my phone in this section, and of all the things in my bag, I grab my phone the most often. On my iPhone, there is the buttons over on the side, as well as the cameras over here that are kind of pretty sharp edges. So when I'm taking it out or putting it in, it's probably leaving some of these marks on the leather over here. And the last thing I want to mention is I think most people, including myself, don't really snap this button closed to secure the inner flap, just because it's such a hassle and it doesn't really add much extra security to your bag. So I've noticed that with all of my classic flaps and also my reissue, this button right here actually sits right on top of this closure right here on the leather. So yes, there is this kind of circular dent in the leather right there. Those are the only areas of wear and tear that I see for this bag. And like I mentioned, if you're more careful than I am, then maybe you'll have less wear and tear, or at least you'll be more proactive in buffing out the scratches and that type of thing. But if you're the type of person that maybe puts their bag on the floor, or you're thinking of getting a larger bag than this, that you're using more on a daily basis, carrying it on public transportation, then it might not be the best idea to get it in lambskin. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. If you guys liked it, please do give this video a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do consider subscribing for new videos every single week. And I'll leave 2 videos up on the screen for you to watch next. So I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.